And welcome to the National Park Service and the Federal Aviation Administration public meeting for the draft air tour management plan for Natural Bridges National Monument. My name is Michelle Carter. I'm an environmental protection specialist with the National Park Service, and I'll be your moderator for this evening. I'd like to start off by defining a couple of acronyms that you'll hear us use throughout the meeting. You'll hear us refer to the National Park Service as NPS, the Federal Aviation Administration as FAA, and the Air Tour Management Plans as ATMPs. We'll define the remaining acronyms as we go along. Next slide, please. We're holding this virtual public meeting to review the draft ATMP for natural bridges and to seek public feedback on the draft. This meeting is being held pursuant to the National Parks Air Tour Management Act of 2000, also known as NPATMA, and its implementing regulations. You'll hear a little bit more about NPATMA and the draft ATMP here shortly, along with information on how you could submit questions during the meeting and official comments. But before we dive into the presentations, I would like to take a minute and introduce our presenters and provide a little bit more information about our meeting logistics and how you can participate. Next slide, please. So joining us this evening as presenters are Eric Elmore, Senior Policy Advisor with the Office of Environment and Energy of FAA. From the Natural Sounds and Night Skies Division of the National Park Service, we have Vicki Ward, Overflights Program Manager. And representing Natural Bridges, we have the Park Superintendent, Vernon Cody, ecologist, Matt Van Scoyt, and Park Planner, Amy Tindick. Eric and Vicki are going to give a brief overview of NPATMA and the purpose of today's meeting, and then we'll hear from the park staff who will share information from the park's perspective in the context of the ATMP and park-specific resources. Next slide, please. So throughout the meeting, we invite you to submit questions, which we'll address after all of the presentations as part of our Q&A session. And questions submitted through today's meeting will be considered by the agencies as they continue developing the draft ATMPs, but they're not what we would consider to be formal comments. Next slide, please. All official comments must be submitted through the NPS Planning, Environment, and Public Comment site, or PEPC as we call it, or sent to the mailing addresses that are listed on the park's PEPC site. Only comments received through one of these two avenues will become part of the official record, and they must be submitted on or before October 3rd of this year. The agencies are not accepting official comment via email. And we'll share a little bit more information about commenting later in this presentation. Next slide, please. So this meeting is being live streamed across Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. If you're watching on one of these platforms, you can submit your questions using the link to the Google form that FAA is going to post in the chat area of whichever platform you're using. When the time comes, we'll read your question aloud and our presenters will respond. We're going to do our best to get to all of the questions, but in the event we don't get to your question, we will provide contact information at the end where you can go for post-meeting follow-up. And if you want to have a pen and paper handy, we'll share that information at the end in case you're just listening in and not able to see the presentation. Our overall meeting will be 90 minutes long and will adjourn at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. If we get through the questions early, we'll keep the meeting active. We plan to keep it active until 6 p.m. if the questions keep coming in. And please note, the meeting's being recorded. We appreciate you joining us this evening to learn more about Natural Bridges Draft ATMP. And we're going to now play a short overview video before I turn it over to Eric and Vicki to provide additional details about NPATMA and why we're here today.
The United States is home to some of the most breathtaking national parks and tribal lands in the world. It is important that we protect these lands while ensuring that the public has ample opportunity to enjoy these national treasures. Air tours offer the public a totally different type of experience. The Federal Aviation Administration and the National Park Service work together to manage air tours over national parks. We are developing plans that help protect wildlife, wilderness character, cultural resources, natural soundscapes, and visitor enjoyment. These plans are known as Air Tour Management Plans, and today we will explore the specifics of the draft plan for your park. As part of our planning process, we consult with tribes, Native Hawaiian organizations, state and tribal historic preservation officers, and wildlife biologists. We assess noise, wildlife protection, and other environmental considerations, and we will continue to make adjustments to these plans as needed. And we consider the appropriate level of National Environmental Policy Act review for these plans. The FAA and the National Park Service are committed to ensuring safe flights at our national parks while safeguarding park resources. Following today's presentation, we encourage you to review your park's draft Air Tour Management Plan and provide official comments through the National Park Service Planning, Environment, and Public Comment website. Together, we can celebrate these special places and ensure they can be enjoyed for generations to come.
All right. Thank you, Michelle, and welcome everybody. My name is Eric Elmore. I'm a senior policy advisor in the Office of Environment and Energy with the Federal Aviation Administration. Today, I'm going to provide an overview of the National Parks Air Tour Management Act, known as NEPATMA, and my colleague Vicki Ward will provide an overview of air tour management plans. Next slide. So NEPATMA requires the Federal Aviation, in cooperation with the National Park Service, to develop an ATMP for those parks and tribal lands where operators have applied to conduct commercial air tours. The Act applies to commercial air tours that are within 1/2 mile of the park, over tribal lands within or abutting a park, and 5,000 feet altitude or less above ground level, known as AGL. Next slide, please. NEPATMA does not apply to general aviation, commercial airline, or military flights. I would also add that NEPATMA does not apply to drones, strictly applies to commercial air tours. NEPATMA does not apply to Alaska parks, nor does it apply to Grand Canyon National Park or Rocky Mountain National Park. In 2012, NEPATMA was amended so that parks with 50 or fewer reported flights per year are exempt from developing an air tour management plan unless this exemption is withdrawn by NPS. If abutting tribal lands are or may be overflown, tribes must be invited as cooperating agencies for National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA, compliance. Next slide, please. All right, in regards to operating authority, commercial air tour operators apply for FAA operating authority in order to operate over national park system units and abutting tribal lands. Back in 2000, when the NEPATMA was passed, there were air tours occurring throughout the country and in this park as well. And at that time, FAA had to issue what is known as interim operating authority to air tour operators that were operating at that time. So commercial air tour operators fall into two categories: existing commercial air tour operators, what I just kind of described, those that are currently operating, and new entrant commercial air tour operators. Those are operators that do not currently have authority, but are going to apply for operating authority at that park. Next slide, and I'll hand it over to Vicki. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Hi, everyone who's viewing this meeting. My name is Vicki Ward. I'm from the Natural Sounds and Night Skies Division in the National Park Service, and I will continue the overview of NEPATMA. Air tour management plans have an objective that is included in the Act, and that objective is to develop acceptable and effective measures to mitigate or prevent the significant adverse impacts, if any, resulting from commercial air tour operations upon natural and cultural resources, visitor experiences, and tribal lands. Next slide. An air tour management plan has contents that are prescribed by the PATMA, and those include may prohibit commercial air tour operations in whole or in part. They may also establish conditions for the conduct of air tour operations, including the routes, altitudes, time of day restrictions, restrictions for particular events, such as a ceremony or other event at a park where they want some quiet time, and the maximum number of flights, which could be on a daily, a weekly, a yearly, or a seasonal basis. The air tour management plan applies to all commercial air tour operations within 1/2 mile outside the boundary of the national park and below 5,000 feet above ground level, as mentioned earlier. An air tour management plan must include incentives for the adoption of quiet technology. These are types of aircraft that are quieter than the standard helicopters or fixed wing aircraft. An air tour management plan must also provide for the allocation of opportunities to conduct air tours when the air tour management plan limits the number of operations. And every air tour management plan shall justify and document the need for the measures taken that I just explained, with either a prohibition, the routes, altitudes, time of day restrictions, etc. And those are documented in the air tour management plan, and also the justifications are included in the record of decision. Next slide. For those who might be calling in and can't see the screen, this is a map of the United States that shows the locations of parks where FAA and NPS are working on air tour management plans. Currently, there are 24 parks. We are working on air tour management plans for all these parks, and they range from east to west coast, and there are several out in the eastern United States, in New York and Florida. There's a group of parks in southern Utah, which we're here tonight for Natural Bridges National Monument. And then there are also parks in California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, Olympic and Mount Rainier in Washington, and then 2 parks in Hawaii. Next slide. So for each air tour management plan, the Act requires that the proposed air tour management plan be published in the Federal Register, and we hold at least one public meeting to get input from the public on that draft air tour management plan. The air tour management plan must also comply with the National Environmental Policy Act and other legal requirements, such as the National Historic Preservation Act and the Endangered Species Act. And where appropriate, tribes are invited to participate as cooperating agencies for NEPA compliance in cases where tribal lands are or may be overflown. And as we mentioned earlier, the purpose of today's meeting is to review the components of the draft air tour management plan for Natural Bridges National Monument. Thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Michelle and the superintendent. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric and Vicki. And now we will hear from the park superintendent, Vernon Cody, a little bit about the park's perspective, and then he'll turn it over to Matt and Amy to hear more details about the ATMP.
Thank you for the introduction, Michelle. My name is Vernon Cody, and as the superintendent of Natural Bridges National Monument, I welcome and thank all of you for participating in today's meeting. I will begin by gratefully acknowledging our 11 traditionally associated tribes as the first protectors of natural bridges. An important part of this planning process is our consultation and inclusion of American Indian tribes who have deep cultural connections with natural bridges. We recognize that it is on their ancestral homelands we gather and thank them for their continued stewardship. Natural Bridges was established in 1908 to preserve and provide for public enjoyment of three of the world's largest stream-eroded natural bridges, as well as preserve sacred, ancestral, Puebloan, and other cultural sites in their settings. Today, around 100,000 people visit natural bridges each year, where they enjoy hiking, camping, immersing themselves in the immense darkness of the night skies, or spending time exploring quiet vistas. Each of these experiences is worth protecting, and the goal for this draft air tour management plan is to protect resources and recreational opportunities offered at natural bridges. The draft plan balances preservation with access and recognizes that the airspace above the park should be managed with our unique landscape in mind. More information on how to provide comments will be provided during the meeting and after today's presentation. I encourage you to visit the park's planning website to submit your thoughts. We look forward to hearing and learning from you. The experiences, scenery, and resources protected at natural bridges are irreplaceable. That's why we are looking to you, our community, our stakeholders, and visitors to provide comments on the park's draft air tour management plan. We value your input and we want to hear from you. Now, I will turn the presentation over to Matthew Van Scoik, the park's ecologist and research coordinator.
Thank you, Vernon. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Van Scoik, an ecologist for Natural Bridges National Monument. As Vernon mentioned, the draft ATMP is intended to help us preserve and protect the resources in the monument. And I'll be giving an overview of the spectacular cultural and natural resources found in Natural Bridges. Natural Bridges protects three of the world's largest natural stone bridges and Native American cultural heritage sites in their natural setting. The monument protects more than 7,600 acres on the Colorado Plateau in southeast Utah in San Juan County. The area surrounding the monument ranges from desert canyons along the Colorado River to pinyon juniper woodlands on Cedar Mesa to ponderosa pine forests on Elk Ridge and subalpine forests in the Abajo Mountains. Approximately 70% of the park is eligible wilderness, which we manage as designated wilderness in accordance with the 2006 NPS management policies. Opportunities for solitude in the monument are valuable wilderness characteristics that we manage for. Next slide, please. Here you can see a map of natural bridges to orient you to the area. The visitor center is indicated by the green square. The Natural Bridges Draft Air Tour Management Plan applies to all commercial air tours that fly within 1/2 mile of the boundary of the monument, as represented by the gray line. Next slide, please. The three natural stone bridges found here are among the largest in the world. The bridges exemplify natural geologic and hydrologic processes that sculpted the bridges over great spans of time. The natural bridges are among the many physical and ethnographic features that are sacred to the Native American tribes associated with the monument. The General Land Survey assigned the current Hopi names, attesting to the deep human history and significance of the area as the ancestral homeland of many Native American communities. Sipapu, a Hopi word meaning place of emergence, is the largest of the three bridges, spanning 268 feet. Kachina, which spans 204 feet, is named for the imagery at its base that resembles Kachina, supernatural beings that have the power to control weather, bring rain, and assist the Hopi people. And Owachimo, named for the rock mound on its east abutment. It's thought to be the oldest bridge and spans 180 feet. The entire park is listed on the National Register of Historic Places as the Natural Bridges Archaeological District, which includes 507 contributing resources. The resources contribute to the broader knowledge of prehistoric occupation on Cedar Mesa and include both simple lithic scatters as well as multi-room pueblos. Elevations near natural bridges range from about 3,700 feet at height to 8,500 feet on Elk Ridge to 11,368 feet on Abajo Peak. The deep, moist canyons and associated plant and animal communities in the monument are regionally significant due to the long history of protection that has maintained these systems in their natural condition. The remote nature of the park provides opportunities for nearly 100,000 annual visitors to discover and enjoy wilderness and solitude. In a remote setting, essentially unchanged since indigenous people inhabited the area, the monument protects and preserves the same dark night skies, natural soundscapes, and clear, clean air that people observed and valued over hundreds of years ago. The following are management objectives related to the development of this ATMP. The protection of wildlife known to be sensitive to the effects of aircraft overflights, including several species of diurnal raptor like the golden eagle and the peregrine falcon, and the federally listed Mexican spotted owl, migratory birds, and mammals like the desert bighorn sheep, mule deer, and mountain lion. Management objectives also include the protection of cultural properties and landscapes that are important to Native American tribes associated with the monument. And lastly, the protection of primitive experiences for visitors and opportunities to experience quiet and solitude in a remote natural setting. Next slide, please. 5 commercial air tour operators hold interim operating authority, which we will refer to as IOA, to conduct a combined total of 145 commercial air tours over Natural Bridges National Monument each year. What this means is that the operators were previously granted the authority by the FAA to fly commercial air tours over the monument. 3 of those operators have not reported flying commercial air tours over the monument since reporting began in 2013. 2 commercial operators, Red Tail Aviation and Southwest Safaris, currently conduct commercial air tours over natural bridges. Based on the 3-year average of reporting data from 2017 to 2019, Red Tail Aviation conducts an average of 53 commercial air tours, and Southwest Safaris conducts an average of 20 commercial air tours over the monument each year. These reporting data indicate that in 2017, the busiest year within the 2017 to 2019 timeframe, commercial air tours occurred on 69 days, with 1 flight occurring for most of these days. Currently, commercial air tours are typically conducted between the hours of 7 a.m. and 2 p.m. and may occur on any day of the week. Under the existing conditions, the annual number of commercial air tours at natural bridges is limited by the IOA. However, there are no restrictions on route, time of day, or altitude to protect park resources or visitor experience. Currently, no procedures are in place to allow the monument to establish no-fly periods for special events or park management activities. There are currently no training or education requirements for the commercial air tour operators flying over the monument. The provisions and conditions in the proposed ATMP, address these issues in a manner designed to protect park resources and visitor experience from the effects of commercial air tours, and support NPS management objectives for natural bridges. I will now hand the presentation over to Amy Tendick.
Thank you, Matt. My name is Amy Tendick, and I am the Environmental Protection Specialist and Planner for Natural Bridges National Monument. I am going to be discussing the details of the draft air tour management plan. Under the ATMP, 73 annual commercial air tours are authorized. Prior to the development of a draft ATMP, 145 air tours were authorized under interim operating authority. Within the park and a half-mile buffer around the park boundary, air tours will fly no lower than 2,600 feet above ground level under this draft plan. Up until this draft ATMP, there were no restrictions on altitude. Only fixed-wing aircraft are currently conducting air tours over the park, and the draft ATMP states that any new or replacement aircraft must not exceed the noise level produced by the current aircraft in operation. Air tours may operate 2 hours after sunrise until 2 hours before sunset. Air tours may operate any day of the year, except the National Park Service can establish temporary no-fly periods that apply to air tours for special events or planned park management activities. Absent exigent circumstances or emergency operations, the National Park Service will provide a minimum of 15 days written notice to operators for any restrictions that temporarily restrict certain areas or certain times of day, or 60 days written notice to operators for any full-day restrictions in advance of the no-fly period. Events may include tribal ceremonies or other important events in the park. Operators are required to submit semi-annual reports to the FAA and the NPS regarding the number of commercial air tours they have conducted over the park. When made available by park staff, operators or pilots may take at least one training course per year conducted by NPS staff. At the request of either of the agencies, the park staff, the local FAA Flight Standards District Office, and the operator may meet once per year to discuss the draft ATMP and any amendments or other changes to it. Next slide, please. The proposed commercial air tours authorized under this draft ATMP would be conducted on the routes shown on this slide. These are the current routes already flown over the park. Under the ATMP, these routes will be flown at 2,600 feet above ground level. Red Tail Aviation, also known as Aero West, conducts commercial air tours on one route within the park using a fixed-wing aircraft. That is the blue route that you see on this map. Under the draft ATMP, they will be able to fly that route 53 times each year. Southwest Safaris conducts commercial air tours on 4 routes within the park with a fixed-wing aircraft. They will be able to choose one of these other 4 routes on the map to fly 20 commercial air tours each year. Next slide, please. The provisions and conditions in this ATMP are designed to protect park resources and the visitor experience from the effects of commercial air tours and to support NPS management objectives for the park. Under the Act, the FAA granted interim operating authority for air tours over the park. IOA does not provide any operating conditions like routes, altitudes, or time of day for air tours. IOA only caps the number of air tours that can occur in a park annually. The total number of air tours authorized under this ATMP is consistent with the existing air tours reported over the park. The annual flight limits are intended to protect visitor experience, wildlife and cultural resources and related cultural landscapes and ethnographic resources throughout the park by limiting the number of potential disturbances caused by commercial air tours. The condition that commercial air tours will fly no lower than 2,600 feet above ground level, referencing the topographic high point within 1/2 mile of the flight path, complies with guidance for raptor protection including threatened, endangered migratory birds. Because raptor habitat exists throughout the park and nest locations may change over time, the minimum altitude restriction extends uniformly to all routes over the park. It will further avoid or minimize potential effects on other avian species and wildlife by reducing the noise intensity of air tour events in the areas nearest the routes. Next slide, please. Additionally, this provision improves visitor experiences on the ground, including opportunities for solitude and remoteness from sights and sound in eligible wilderness areas, as well as conditions at cultural properties and landscapes by reducing the intensity of air tour noise at ground level. In other words, the elevation of 2,600 feet above ground level is protective of raptors, but also of many other resources and visitor experiences in the park. Sunrise and sunset are important times of day for wildlife and for visitors alike. Biologically important behaviors for many species occur during this time, such as the dawn chorus for songbirds. Wildlife viewing is often conducted during this time of day as well. Time restrictions provide quiet periods of the day during which visitors can enjoy natural sounds, and these designated hours also preserve opportunities for solitude in backcountry areas. Restrictions for particular events are intended to prevent noise interruptions during park events or tribal practices. Operator training and education facilitates effective implementation of the ATMP by making sure operators remain informed regarding the requirements of this draft plan, including any adaptive management measures or amendments. It advances operator understanding of park management objectives and priorities, including noise-sensitive areas, and provides opportunities to enhance the interpretive narrative for air tour clients. The annual meeting will be used to review and discuss implementation of this ATMP between park staff, local FAA Flight Standards District Office staff, and all operators, and will serve to ensure that air tour operators are aware of the terms and conditions of this ATMP and are made aware of new or recurring concerns regarding park resources. Now I will hand it over to Eric from the FAA.
All right, thank you. And thank you, Superintendent Vernon Cody. And thank you as well to Matt Namey for that overview of natural bridges, its resources, and the draft ATMP. So the development of the draft ATMP is considered a federal action that triggers the requirements of the National Environmental Policy Act, or as we call it, NEPA. In the development of this draft, NEPA requires the agencies to consider the human and natural environment that could be affected by this action, the Air Tour Management Plan. We are required to determine the appropriate level of environmental review. Generally, there are 3 levels of environmental review. Categorical exclusions are categories of actions that have been found to not have significant impacts. This mid-level review would be an environmental assessment. That's when there's the potential to have significant impacts. And then there is the 3rd level, an environmental impact statement, when you're pretty sure there will be significant environmental impacts. Finally, the NEPA requires us to prepare the associated environmental review documents, like I said. At this time, FAA and Park Service have conducted an initial impact analysis of this draft ATMP and are considering using a categorical exclusion. The agencies will consider public comments on the Air Tour Management Plan, information obtained during other consultations. We will fully assess the environmental impacts before making a final decision on the appropriate level of environmental review, and we will make that environmental documentation available after the ATMP is final. Next slide, please. So this development of an Air Tour Management Plan also is considered a federal undertaking under the National Historic Preservation Act, and that triggers a requirement under Section 106 for the agencies to consult. Section 106 is basically a 4-step process, and it requires the agencies to define the undertaking and identify consulting parties. It requires us to determine the area of potential effects and identify historic properties within that area. It requires us to assess the effects to historic properties. And finally, we are required to resolve adverse effects, if any are found, to these historic properties. I think we have pretty much completed the first step of defining the undertaking and identify consulting parties, but we are continuing through with that process. The FAA and the NPS have initiated consultation with the State Historic Preservation Officer, the SHPO, tribes, and other consulting parties. Now I'd like to hand it over to Michelle to discuss the Endangered Species Act.
Thanks, Eric. So the FAA and the National Park Service are complying with Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act, or ESA, as they develop the draft ATMP. And this will ensure that the proposed action does not jeopardize the existence of any listed species under ESA or result in destruction or adverse modification of designated critical habitat. The agencies have had informal consultation conversations already with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the preliminary assessment by the agencies is not anticipating these types of impacts. Next slide, please. So as noted earlier, we are currently inviting public comment. We're seeking comment from the public, from tribes, other agencies, and all interested parties on this draft. And the comments must be received on or before October 3rd. Also mentioned earlier that the comments can be submitted one of two ways, either online through the National Park Service comment website, and you'll see the link here on this slide, or by the mailing address on the Pepsi side, on the Pepsi site, excuse me, which is the address is also listed here on this, the slide you see on the screen. And one other reminder that we are not accepting public comment via email. I'd also like to point your attention to the FAQ document that's posted on the Parks Pepsi site right next to the draft ATMP. It has a lot of good Q&As in there. So if somebody from FAA, if they haven't already, could please drop the link to the Pepsi page into the social media platforms, that would be appreciated. Next slide, please. So following the end of the public comment period, FAA and the NPS will review all of the comments and use them to inform the final ATMP. They'll continue to coordinate and complete the tribal, Section 106, and the Section 7 consultations, and they'll conclude the NEPA process by signing a decision document. Once this is wrapped up, the ATMP will be considered complete, and it will be available on both the FAA and NPS websites. FAA will also then update the operations specifications for each air tour operator. Next slide, please. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to all of our presenters, and we'll now turn into the Q&A portion of the meeting. For anyone that may have joined during the presentations, my name is Michelle Carter. I am an environmental protection specialist with the National Park Service, and I'm serving as the moderator of the meeting this evening. And if you have a question you want to submit, you can post it into the Google form using the link that FAA has shared in the chat area of whatever social media platform you're using. And another reminder that the questions that are submitted through today's meeting will be considered by the agencies as they continue drafting the ATMP, but they won't be considered formal comments. The formal comments must be submitted through the Pepsi, the public comment website that I mentioned earlier, or sent via mail to the parks. And again, our date is October 3rd of 2021. I also mentioned earlier at the beginning of the meeting that we're planning to be here for 90 minutes and to adjourn at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. In the event that we get through the questions and there's a lull, we'll continue to hold the meeting to see if questions continue to come in, giving you a chance to maybe think through what you've heard in the presentations or think through any reactions you have to responses that we've given to other questions. And so we may have a little bit of on and off as we give you time to think through questions you may want to submit. And let's see, okay. With that, it does look like we have had a few questions come in. So we'll start off here with a question for Eric. This question is asking, would you mind just not going forward with this plan, please?
All right, thank you, Michelle, and thank you for the question. Actually, NEPATMA requires that an air tour management plan or a voluntary agreement be established for any park that has more than 50 air tours per year. So we are required by law to develop an ATMP or VA, and the agencies have decided to develop an air tour management plan at Natural Bridges. And further, without this air tour management plan, the tours over the park would simply continue to be managed and regulated only within the existing interim operating authority cap number, which is in excess of the number of tours that the draft ATMP is proposing. Additionally, without the air tour management plan, there would be no changes or improvements in specific routes or altitudes or the time of day restrictions that are designed to protect the park natural and cultural resources, as well as tribal values and visitor enjoyment. So the short answer is no, we have to develop this plan, but thank you for the question.
And thank you for the response. We have another question here that we'll give to Vicki. Vicki, they're asking, is this new and why do you want to bring air tours to the park?
Thanks, Michelle, and thanks for that question. As we noted during the presentation, air tours are not new to Natural Bridges. They've been occurring for over 20 years. And in fact, 5 operators are currently authorized to fly a total of 145 commercial air tours over the park. And that's under the interim operating authority that was granted by FAA, which also was a requirement of the Act. So as we've mentioned that IOA, it doesn't set routes or the operating conditions for an operator. It's just a limit on the number of tours each operator is permitted to fly each year. And so on average from 2017 to 2019, 73 commercial air tours have occurred each year over the park and flown by 2 operators. And so this is the annual number that is being proposed in the draft air tour management plan, which is a reduction from the current maximum allowed. So, as we went over, the draft ATMP includes the conditions designed to protect natural and cultural resources and visitor experience. So that includes specifying routes, altitude, aircraft type, day or time restrictions, and restrictions for particular events. So without an air tour management plan, none of those conditions currently exist, and the air tour management plan is designed to put those into place. Okay, thanks for the question.
Thanks, Vicki. Okay, this next question, we'll send it over to Eric. They're asking, what would it take to have an ATMP be no fly?
All right, thank you for that question. So one of the purposes of tonight's meeting is to receive input on this draft ATMP. And so we would encourage anyone who wants to see changes made to this draft ATMP to please submit their comment in Pepsi. Again, as we noted under interim operating authority, the numbers are higher, and the ATMP proposes to reduce these numbers. It makes a lot of modifications and improvements. The agencies think that this is a pretty good plan, but if anybody wants it to be no fly, again, please submit your comments into Pepsi. Thank you.
Thanks again, Eric. Okay. Question now for Vicky. They're asking, do air tour operators have a right to fly over the park, or is it a privilege?
Well, when Congress passed the National Parks Air Tour Management Act, they authorized FAA and NPS to develop air tour management plans. And it's not just unlimited airspace, it's within a specific area. It's below 5,000 feet above ground level and within 1/2 mile of the boundary of the park. So operators are continuing to fly under interim operating authority until that ATMP is developed, which we've FAA and NPS have worked together on developing the draft plan. And when that plan becomes final, it will grant operating authority to the operators to conduct air tours. If that is the outcome of the final plan and in accordance with all the requirements of the plan. And I think, just want to make sure I covered everything for this question. And yeah, so if, so I just want to say, if somebody doesn't want to be, an operator doesn't want to be subject to an air tour management plan, that would be any flying anywhere above 5,000 feet above ground level or more than a 1/2 mile boundary outside of the park. So anyway, hope that answers the question, and thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Vicky. Okay, we have another question here for Eric. Will the NPS be involved in monitoring these air tours? Do park personnel currently have any aircraft monitoring equipment? And if not, will they be getting any?
All right, so questions about monitoring. So first, I think the park does not have any air tour monitoring equipment. However, this air tour management plan requires operators to equip their aircraft with flight monitoring technology and to report that flight monitoring data as part of the semi-annual reports that are congressionally required. The required flight monitoring data that we're looking for will include the latitude, longitude, geometric altitude, tail number, a number of various information data points for us, ping set to maximum of 15 seconds, their certificate number, etc. So for aircraft that are not already equipped with some type of flight monitoring technology, they would have to equip their aircraft within 180 days of the effective date of this air tour management plan. And they are required to use the flight monitoring technology whenever they are conducting an air tour. So that would help us determine situations of potential non-compliance and would help us kind of administer the air tour management plan. But thank you for that question.
Okay. The next question, we'll go back over to Vicky. They're asking, what's the maximum penalty an air tour operator can be assessed for flying irresponsibly?
Okay, thanks for that question. And I am assuming that's an air tour operator flying, who's subject to an air tour management plan. So the air tour management plans will be enforced, and they will any violations or noncompliance with the plan would be investigated, and that, depending on the outcome of the investigation, it could result in partial or total loss of authorization to conduct commercial air tours authorized by the air tour management plan. And then that any violation of those operating specs would be treated in accordance with FAA order 2150.3, which is the FAA compliance and enforcement program. And then FAA's approach to enforcement compliance program has a defined process with increasing levels of responses if violations to an ATMP should occur, up to and including revocation of their operating certificate. So it's a graduated enforcement program. And I hope that answered the question. Thanks, Michelle.
Great, thanks. Okay, the next question for Eric, kind of connected maybe in a little way to how you responded, Vicki, but why are the 5 tour routes needed and how will they be enforced?
All right, so thank you for that question. In regards to the routes at Natural Bridges, we started using route information that was provided by the air tour operators themselves. And then the agencies did an analysis of these routes. And based on that analysis, we saw just a need to make some minor adjustments to the altitudes, I think in response to our Section 7 consultation, but that's how the routes were formed. And in regarding to compliance with flying those routes, as previously stated, the Air Tour Management Plan requires the flight following, the flight tracking capabilities, and that would help the agencies ensure that the operators are staying on the routes. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Okay. Let me see here. So for the next question, we'll bring on a new face from the park. We'll put this one over to Amy. And the question is, will human park visitors, when overflown, be able to hear the aircraft noise?
Thank you, Michelle. Good question. So how loud an air tour is perceived to a visitor on the ground depends on a number of factors, including proximity to the flight path, type of aircraft, other sources of noise, and surrounding landscape features. So visitors near an aircraft's flight path are more likely to hear the aircraft passing overhead. But other noise sources such as vehicles, other people, wildlife, wind, and precipitation events can mask the sound of an aircraft. Terrain features and buildings which block the direct line of sight between a noise source and a visitor may also have an effect. So really it's situation dependent, but one of the resources that we strive to protect here in the National Park Service and here at Natural Bridges is the preservation of natural soundscapes. So thank you again for the question.
Amy, thanks for being on the team tonight. It looks like we have a question about drone usage in the park. And the ATMP does not actually cover drones. And it's important to note that launching, landing, or operating unmanned aircraft or drones from national parks is actually prohibited. Okay, let's see here. We'll go back over to Eric for this next question. They're asking what reduction in decibels is necessary for aircraft modifications to qualify for a quiet technology exemption. Is there an established sound level that is proven not to disturb wildlife and park visitors at 1 hour after sunrise?
All right, Michelle, I'm going to try and answer that as best I can. It's pretty technical, so honestly, I don't know about the reduction in decibels necessary, and I do not know if there's an established sound level that's been proven not to disturb wildlife, but I'll leave that to the experts if they want to hop in. What I can tell you is that FAA does have an advisory circular, FAA AC 93-2, and that has a list of aircraft, both fixed wing and rotor wing, that meet the definition of a QT aircraft. I would note that this advisory circular was originally developed to identify quiet technology aircraft at Grand Canyon National Park, and the agencies use it at other parks as well. That's the best I can do. I don't know if there's any other that can add technical expertise to that.
Great, thanks, Eric. Okay, for the next question, we'll go back to Amy with the park. They're asking if the ATMP initiative if it's being led by complaints of aircraft noise, and if so, how many documented complaints has the park received, and how are those complaints recorded?
All right, thanks, Michelle. As was noted earlier in the presentation, the ATMP is being prepared under the requirements of NEPATMA. The park, it does not track complaints specifically about aircraft noise, but has received anecdotal reports in the past. But it's important to note that this plan, this ATMP, is developed to protect park resources and is not driven by noise complaints and addressing those. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Okay, we have a NEPA related question that we'll pass over to Vicky. They're asking, how does completing only a categorical exclusion fulfill the U.S. Court of Appeal mandate to provide complete NEPA reviews of ATMPs?
Okay, yeah, thanks for that question. And this is a federal action. The near-term management plan is a federal action and is subject to NEPA. So under NEPA, an environmental review can involve 3 different levels of analysis: a categorical exclusion determination, an environmental assessment, and a finding of no significant impact, or an environmental impact statement. So analysis has been conducted, and we are considering using an NPS categorical exclusion 3.3A1 from the National Environmental Policy Act handbook that allows changes or amendments to an approved action when such changes would cause no or only minimal environmental impact. We are completing an analysis of X consistent with NEPA. The type of determination that is most appropriate to the analysis will be informed by the feedback we receive during this public review period on the draft air management plan to identify if additional effects not yet identified and analyzed exist, and whether or not there is the potential for adverse impacts that would make a different NEPA pathway more appropriate, such as an environmental assessment instead of a documented categorical exclusion. The agencies will consider public comments on the air management plan, information obtained during consultations, and fully assess the environmental impacts before making the final determination on what NEPA pathway is appropriate. And so just a reminder that a categorical exclusion does not mean it's exempt from NEPA. It means it's excluded for preparing an environmental impact statement. I hope that answered the question. There's a lot of technical NEPA terms in there. Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Vicki. All right. Well, there's always a bit of a lag here between questions getting submitted and we actually see it on our end. It does look like there's probably some more questions that are coming in. So we're going to give it just like a couple of minutes to give those of you out there time to keep typing away your questions, to think about what you've heard, to think about the responses that we've provided to questions and anything else that you might like to submit, whether it's new or get clarification. So I'm just going to go off camera and off mic for a little bit while you guys have a chance to process, and we'll be back on here in just a couple of minutes. Okay, we have had a couple more questions come in. And before I dive into it, a note to please keep submitting your questions. Like, we're here to answer anything that you may be thinking of or need clarification on related to the draft ATMP. So please keep the questions coming in. But to the two questions we have in the queue for right now, the first one, we'll pass it over to Vicky. They're asking what sound studies have been performed at Natural Bridges to measure aircraft noise over the park.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, an acoustic report for the Southeast Utah Group of National Parks was published in 2008, and that covers the parks. Let me make sure I get all the names here. It includes Arches National Park, Canyonlands National Park, Coal Wheat National Monument, and Natural Bridges National Monument. And so the objective of that study was to determine the existing and natural ambient sound levels in the primary land cover types of those park units, and to determine the primary sources of sounds, which include natural and non-natural in those locations. So that, like I said, that report has been published. It is available on a NPS website that is known as IRMA, IRMA. So if you can go to whoever asked that question, I'll read it out slowly and tell you how to search for it. It's at irma.nps.gov/data store/reference/profile 2175684. And if I misspoke that, you can just go to that NPS IRMA site, and you'll get to a search page, and you can type in the park name and just like a keyword like acoustic, and you should be able to pull up that report. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Vicki. So the next question, excuse me, is citing 40 CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, section 1508.8, and it's saying that that section requires government programs to address the indirect effects of any actions. Although the ATMP only extends to a half-mile boundary around the park, indirect effects stretch all the way back to the airport. So how is this ATMP addressing the damage to homes and businesses affected by the air tours as NEPA requires? And so that's a good question. We are in the process of continuing to analyze the impacts of commercial air tours. So far, we haven't indicated these types of effects, but I do want to note that this is exactly the type of feedback that we're looking for right now as part of the public comment process. We take comments to hear from the public about whether or not there's something substantive that we've missed in our description of what we're doing. So we ask and encourage you to please submit those types of comments into the Pepsi system. If you feel like there's something that is not discussed in the draft that should be included, that's exactly the type of feedback we're looking for. So thank you for that. And please make sure you actually get that into the Pepsi site, or you could submit it again via postal mail to the address on the screen here. Okay, well, thank you. We are in another bit of a lull here. Again, a bit of a delay sometimes between when the questions are getting submitted and we see them on our end. So we're planning to stick around. Please keep submitting the questions. We'll give you some time to get everything typed in. And as soon as we see the stuff here on our end, we'll come back on and do our best to give you some answers. We'll be right back. Okay, thanks for keeping them coming in here. We have a question that we'll pass now over to Amy with the park. We've received a question on the potential impacts of commercial air tours on wilderness. So if you could speak to that, please.
Sure, thanks, Michelle. As was noted during the presentation, the air tour management plan is developed to protect park resources, and wilderness values are a park resource. The proposed annual flight limits, the routes, the minimum altitudes, all defined in this ATMP, are intended to protect wilderness and visitor experience by limiting the number of potential disturbances caused by commercial air tours, by providing opportunities for solitude and remoteness from sights and sounds within wilderness areas, and by reducing the intensity of air tour noise at ground level. The hours of operation additionally would provide quiet periods of the day during which visitors and wildlife can experience natural sounds and preserves opportunities for solitude. Thank you. That was a great question.
My apologies for the delay. I was trying to see if we're still waiting on a couple of questions to come in here. So it looks like folks are still out there. So thank you. And please continue submitting your questions, and we'll be back on here in a second when it comes through. Thank you. Okay, we've had a couple more questions come in. I'd like to note that we're starting to come to the end of the meeting. So if you do have any last minute thoughts, please get them submitted right away. And let's see. So we have a question here, Eric. We've actually been asked a question about the opinion of the two air tour operators, their opinion of our draft ATMP. So if you could speak to that.
All right, thank you, Michelle. So the agencies have not discussed the published draft ATMP with the operators. However, we are seeking comments from the public, including operators, through the Pepsi website. And so we would direct the operators and the general public to submit their opinions or comments or concerns to the Pepsi website. Thank you.
Apologies for being a little bit slow with my clicking here this evening. Okay, so we have had a question come in, and the commenter is asking what can be done to make government smaller, less complex, and thus more accountable to the people. And actually, that is outside the scope of this meeting, but thank you for the question. And I'm looking here to see if we have any more questions that are, give it a minute here, see if they're coming in. Thank you for your patience with me. Give it another minute or two and we'll be back to answer. Looks like we might have one or two more coming in. So we'll be back on just a second. Okay, thank you. We have another question here. We'll pass it over to Vicki. The question is, does the ATMP assure that the public has a right to see your park from the air?
Thanks for that question. Well, yes, the draft ATMP does propose up to 73 air tours per year over natural bridges. And that's provides that opportunity to two air tour operators. And the air tour management plans is specifying the routes and altitudes, so people would still be able to see the features of the park from the air. And so, yeah, that's what the draft plan is right now. If anybody has comments on what else we should include or consider for that draft air tour management plan, please submit them through Pepsi. Thank you.
Okay, we're actually coming up now on the end of our meeting time. And as I mentioned earlier, we will provide contact information if you did have a question that wasn't answered. So get your pen ready. And before closing out here, I just want to make sure that I do point everybody once again to the Parks Pepsi page. That's where you'll also find the draft ATMP along with the other frequently asked questions. So please feel free to go over there and check it out. If you did have a question that was not answered during the meeting, you can call Caitlin Thomas with the park. She's the public affairs specialist, and her phone number, I'll say it twice, is 435-719-2107. Again, that number is 435-719-2107. If FAA could also drop that into the chat, it would be helpful. And I think that that's it for tonight. My apologies. We want to make sure that you know that comments need to be received on or before October 3rd. If you have any trouble, you can reach out with questions to the contact we just shared. And I just want to thank you again for your participation this evening. I did have one note that I guess there was a question that came in at the end, and they were asking specifically about a report. They wanted to know where it was, and our team does have your contact information. We have your email address, so we'll be able to follow up with you directly. We'll make sure that we do get that to you. And so on behalf of both the National Park Service and the FAA, we thank you for your participation. We really do look forward to hearing from you, and we hope you have a good rest of your evening. Take care.